Well, it's been a while, hasn't it? I've had a very nice summer break. Let's consider this season 2. And to kick things off, I'm going to start by going through a tasting masterclass today, just focusing on the look of wine. Hello, it's the Grape Explorer, and today I'm going to be taking you through a tasting masterclass, just focusing on what we can deduce from our wines simply by looking at them. Now, I've got a red and a white in front of me here. There are a number of key steps that you go through when you're trying to assess the look of wine. You start off by, of course, looking at the wine. Now, the first thing that you want to consider when you're looking at your wine is kind of the clarity. And really, it's going to fall into one of two categories. That wine's either going to be clear or it's not. You want a clear wine, of course, although having a slightly hazy wine doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. You might find a little bit more about that wine as you get onto the aroma and the tastings. But just to look at a wine, you kind of want to get the comfort that that wine is nice and clear. That can tell you a number of things, really. If it is particularly hazy, it may be that it is deficient in some way. That might be an indicator that the wine is bad or is past its peak and is not suitable for drinking. So a nice clear wine is what you want to start off with. Other things you can deduce from taking that first look at the wine is whether or not there is any sediment in it, whether there's any bits of corks floating about in it, and of course whether it is wine and not just watered down apple juice. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe for more wine education, and please also hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and it costs absolutely nothing to hit it. The next thing we're then going to look at is the intensity of the colour of the wine, which again is going to be able to tell us a number of different things about that particular wine. The intensity of the colour could be something like pale, it could be medium intensity, it could be deep intensity. And that may speak to the type of wine that you're about to drink. Now, if you're blind tasting wine, it's going to be able to tell you a lot of information up front. It might be an indicator as to how the wine was finished. It might be an indicator as to which particular grape you might be enjoying. So, for example, for this white one, this is particularly pale in colour. That suggests to me that perhaps it's been finished in steel tanks rather than oak. Oak can of course impart some colour. In the case of this particular red one, this is quite a deep intensity of colour, and that might mean it's something like it could be a young wine, or it could be a thicker skinned wine. It's not necessarily something with a thin skin. Thicker skins, of course, are going to give us more colour in our wine. So when we're looking at the intensity of the colour of our wine, that can tell us an awful lot about the wine we're about to drink. You know, one way that a lot of people judge the intensity of the colour is to tip the glass to about a 45-degree angle. And one of the giveaways here when you're looking at intensity of wine is how much does the colour go to the edge of the rim of the wine in the glass. So in the case of this particular one that I'm looking at here, I can see that it goes incredibly watery the closer it gets to the edge of the rim of the wine, and that's why I'm going to give this one more of a pale classification. In the case of this one here, the colour almost goes all the way up to the edge of the wine that's in the glass, and so therefore I'd be giving that a slightly deeper classification of colour. And one other way to do it, if I just grab this tasting sheet, is to actually take a look through and see, well, what can I see through the wine itself? You know, if you've got something like a pale Pinot Noir, for example, you can really read all the way through the wine right onto that card. So that's another useful indicator that you might want to use when you're looking at your wine. So that's intensity of colour. And finally, we're looking at the colour of the wine itself, and it's all about the composition of the different colours across the spectrum here. And again, this is going to tell us lots about the wine that we're looking at. So in the case of the white wine, for example, I've already established that it's quite pale in intensity. I'm then thinking about how far did the colour come up to the rim of the wine in the glass. Now, I already said that this was getting quite watery at the edge, so we're not dealing with a particularly deep colour. This is something along the lemon classification of colour of wine. And with the red wine, that colour was going slightly more to the edge. This looks like quite a young wine. It's sort of ruby bordering on purple. I'm actually going to say that this wine is ruby in colour. So what does that mean from a colour perspective? Well, lots of different things really. Again, it can talk to some of the winemaking processes that have occurred before it reaches bottle. You know, if it's particularly deep in colour, it might be particularly young, particularly if it's something like a purple for a red or a pale lemon for a white. And then also the finish might have had some impact on what that colour looks like. Now, usually that's going to happen more in white wine. Things like white wine aged in oak is going to give it that little bit more colour. It's going to perhaps turn things a little bit more gold. And from an aged perspective, it might be starting to turn it amber or even brown. From a red wine perspective, we're going to be looking at some of the same characteristics here, but particularly with red wine, we start to see the differences in colour when we're talking about aging. This ruby wine, if it was aged, is going to go to a more of a garnet colour. We're going to see some orange on the rim, and then we're going to move into some of those brown characteristics as well. So white wines, they gain pigmentation as they age. Red wines lose pigmentation as they age. There are also a few other observations that you might make when you're looking at your wine. If I tip these wines to a 45-degree angle and then tip them back, I'm going to be checking to see if there are any tears or legs forming on the glass. The viscosity of certain wines, owing to their alcohol and sugar levels, will create these tears going around. Now, you can't see any on here. These are particularly low alcohol wine. In the case of something like a white wine, you might also check for things like bubbles, which might suggest that it's a sparkling wine. And we'll tell you a little bit about the wine as well. You know, those bubble sensations might tell you a little bit about the quality of wine, as well as some indication of what type of sparkling wine you're looking at as well. But be wary, if you do get some sparkles in a wine when you're not necessarily expecting it, that may be due to an unexpected fault in the wine. There might be some carbonation within that wine that's creating a spritz, which could be considered a fault. And so just by looking at a glass of wine, we can start to tell an awful lot about what we're about to drink. So that's the look of wine. Now, I'm interested to hear from yourselves, of course. Any tips or hints that you have when you're looking at a wine, please let me know in the comments section below. And we'll be picking up in part 2 when we will be going through the smell of wine.